Hello and welcome to this premium video from the Lotus Eaters. I'm joined by Carl.
Hello.
We're here to talk about a rather interesting Vice article by Sophie Lewis, or about Sophie Lewis, which is all about the attempt to deconstruct the family and destroy it from a feminist perspective. We found this article online. We thought it was very interesting and it's worth your time to go through in detail.
Yeah, so where to begin? I mean, the very title of the article is "We Can't Have a Feminist Future Without Abolishing the Family," which, to my response, would be, well, then we don't have a feminist future.
That would seem to be the logical conclusion, wouldn't it?
Yeah, the subtext is the feminist thinker Sophie Lewis has a radical proposal for what comes next. No, the framing though, what comes next, as if this is just a logical extension of progress.
Right, yeah.
Even though it seems like we were just discussing before we started, feminism seems to have basically died. Which is no bad thing, but it's become boring and not novel.
It's not very fashionable, is it?
No, it's not. It's kind of embarrassing, actually. But this is not a new argument at all. I mean, you can find examples of people theorizing the abolition of the family, going all the way back to Plato in his Republic. I have some quotes, in fact: marriage and the possession of women and the procreation of children, which will all follow the general principle that friends have all things in common. That will be the best way of settling them. And this comes from Plato's desire for men and women to be equal and have, in respect of each other, all the same duties.
I seem to recall, isn't this the same work by Plato in which he argues that women should cut their breasts off to be good soldiers?
No, I think that's the mythical Amazons that do that.
I thought he recommended it for the soldiers of the Republic, that women could be soldiers, but they had to give up all of their procreation rights.
We will have to do a book club on the Republic, because it's been a few years since I've read it.
Okay.
But
this is the level of thinking that we're getting from.
Yes, and this is why essentially everything Aristotle does is basically to point out that everything Plato does is wrong. But anyway, this again is a long train of thought that continues into the socialists. And I found a really good paper discussing socialists and the abolition of the family, in which the author talks about how the utopian socialists had preceded Marx and Engels in the rejection of traditional families. But of course, Marx and Engels were very much strong proponents of this, particularly Engels, for some reason, and contributed mightily to it. Engels, in fact, after Marx's death, published The Origin of Family, Private Property and the State in 1884. And this apparently was endorsed by Marx. He claimed that Marx agreed with these views, but of course Marx was dead by this point. But Marx had mentioned abolishing the family in passing, but it wasn't something that he obsessed over like Engels.
Right, I see.
But anyway, moving on, in 1895, Clara Zetkin, the leader of the socialist women's movement in Germany, praised Engels' work as the most fundamental importance for the struggle for liberation of the entire female sex.
Wow, that's a bold statement.
It is. And so Marx and Engels' critique of the family consisted in three main elements. One, the depiction of the hypocrisy and inhumanity of the contemporary bourgeois family. Two, the historicization of the family, i.e. an historical account of the origins and development of the family in the past. And of course, a vision of the future family in the communist society.
So there's very much a narrative style to this, because firstly what they're trying to do is replace the wholesome narrative of the family as something that's good for people with a conception that it's primarily about abuse and hypocrisy and inhumanity and oppression. And then to supplant the old narrative, the mythical narrative, with a scientific one, which is a historicization, where they talk about it in terms of origins and development.
Yes, very much.
So they're basically trying to drain away all of the value from the idea of family and replace it with essentially their critique upon which it cannot stand.
Yeah, absolutely. And this it feels very Alinskian. If you've ever read Rules for Radicals,
Yes.
he points out what you've got to do is stigmatize the opposition 100%. So everything about them is bad, and then replace it with your own suggestions. And so that's exactly right. In order to justify doing this, the entire notion of the family has to become an evil thing in this view. And so they carry on saying, while Marx once alluded to a higher form of family in the communist society, he and Engels usually wrote about the destruction, dissolution, and abolition of the family.
Didn't they normally write about the destruction, dissolution, and abolition of everything, though?
Yes, but the family is a core component of this because it is essentially the engine of inequality and the root and spring of capitalism.
I see.
So anyway, the relationships they envisaged for the communist society would have little or no resemblance to the family as it existed in 19th century Europe or indeed anywhere else. Thus, it is certainly appropriate to define their position as the abolition of the family, which I agree with. It's something that they've been complaining about forever, because one of the problems of the family is it allows inherited wealth, and that's not equality, and that stops communism.
So we've demonstrated quite clearly that the earliest and most influential communist thinkers were all about the abolition of the family.
Yes, and so Sophie Lewis is she herself is a Marxist, of course, and is following clearly in this tradition and makes no bones about it. But anyway, returning to the Vice article. They say, earlier this month, in 2020, at a lecture in Lower Manhattan hosted by the arts journal eFlux, Sophie Lewis, 31, reflected on what some might see as an obvious irony to her crisscrossing the ocean to care for her ailing mother. Verso Books had just published her first book, Full Surrogacy Now, a polemic that calls for the abolishing of the family.
Radical leftists, and obvious irony. Imagine my shock.
Yeah, I know, right? It's very interesting how this whole thing feels very much like a cope from her. She will get into how she didn't appreciate her own family life and now is stuck caring for her mother, and has theorized how it could be that, actually, maybe I shouldn't have to care for my own mother. Like, right. I see where this is going. She says, quote, in 2019, in all its general geopolitical ghoulishness, has been a difficult one for this particular family abolitionist, Lewis told the audience about 24. It's been surreal because the temporal coincidence of the full surrogacy launch with this unprecedented requirement for me, that I be at my closest bio-relative's bedside. Imagine referring to your parents as bio-relatives.
Oh, don't you?
Not very often, no. I mean,
only when they annoy me.
What an awful dehumanizing way of doing
that just made me shiver. That bio-relative.
Yeah, I mean, it's like how a machine would describe it.
Yeah.
It's very anti-human. And this kind of anti-human theme, I think, permeates this entire article, this entire argument. But anyway, that I be at my closest bio-relative's bedside brought the stakes of my subject matter to life with almost unbearable intensity. So that's interesting, isn't it? It's like, if you genuinely believed in this, why would there be such intensity to the fact that your mother is very ill and turns out she dies as well? Why is this so unbearable if you can seriously theorize that the family should be abolished? You're deliberately
build a career out of saying that.
Build a career out of saying that. You are, in fact, belying the fact that there is something deeper and more human that underpins the relationship between a mother and a daughter, and yet you're here trying to find a way to rationalize the destruction of that.
Yeah, why would there be unbearable intensity to this if we were merely talking about matters of material economic interrelations?
Socially constructed relations, as it were. But anyway, they say the book in its core premise has gained widespread attention from leftist publications like Jacobin and The Nation, all the way to Fox News' Tucker Carlson. And they fail to mention here, but later on in the article, they get to how everyone condemned this. Like, even the leftists condemned her theories here. But anyway, recently the columnist David Brooks declared in The Atlantic that the nuclear family was a mistake. So, who's he?
Yeah.
What do I care about his opinion? When Lewis demands full surrogacy now, she isn't talking about commercial surrogacy or surrogacy trademarked, as she puts it. Instead, she uses the surrogacy industry to build the argument that all gestation is work because of the immense physical and emotional labour it requires of those who do it. She often refers to pregnancy as an extreme sport. And the thing is, I don't disagree with that characterization. I've witnessed pregnancies firsthand, and they are terrifying. And I wrote an article about it called "The Heroism of Women."
You did, but I think calling pregnancy an extreme sport is very disingenuous, because it's trying to completely change all of the associations and interrelations to do with the concept of pregnancy.
That's true.
Right? People don't get pregnant recreationally necessarily. It's not like,
some women do, actually.
I'm a bit bored this year. I'm going to go and get pregnant. Sounds like fun.
Some women actually do that. I'm not going to lie. There are definitely women who do that. But I agree with her that what I think she's trying to put across here, the immense physical and emotional labour that are required of it, and that is true. And I do think that the conservative perspective does recognize and honor the difficulty in childbearing and child rearing. That is true. And so I do think that there is some legitimacy. Again, you can see my Heroism of Women article if you'd like to know more. So it's not that there isn't an issue. And I think that what she is essentially trying to say is she feels a bit left out in the cold here, right? As in there's not the appropriate honor being done to women in this context, and I do think there is something there. I haven't fully fleshed this thesis out, but like there is something important there, I think. But anyway, she says, if all form of pregnancy counts as work, then we can take a clear-eyed look at our current working conditions. It is a wonder we let fetuses inside us, she says at the start of her book. I imagine she's pro-abortion. Doesn't come up, but she does have that kind of view about things, doesn't she?
It is a wonder. Some might even call it a miracle of life.
Exactly. And again, she's arriving quite at some very conservative positions here, isn't she? From this. But yes, it's a wonder we let fetuses inside us. Well, a lot of the time it kind of happens without meaning to. They call these accidental pregnancies. But she says roughly 1,000 people in the US die as a result of pregnancy and childbirth each year. We could more specifically call them women, not just people, but mostly poor women and women of colour. This situation is social, not simply natural. Things are like this for political and economic reasons. We made them this way. When we get to the modern leftism, this is social and not natural.
Yep.
Really. Giving birth isn't very natural.
And X group most affected as well.
Of course, yeah. But we can always return to nature, and you can give birth in a cave if you like.
Yeah, I mean, like 10 times as many people will die, but you probably won't have the racial inequities, so that's an improvement.
That's a very good point. She imagines a future where the labour of making new human beings is shared amongst all of us. Mother is no longer a natural category, instead something we can choose.
But you can't choose to be a mother without being a mother.
That's correct.
And what do you need to do to be a mother? Well, you need to have children and you need to care for them.
Yes.
But she's basically saying, no, let's get rid of the having children from all this. Let's just let people choose to be mothers. Isn't that fine?
Men can choose to be mothers. Mother is no longer a natural category. So we've arrived at the decanting of children from Brave New World. And so, and this is genuinely what she's hypothesizing here as well. She doesn't want mother to be a natural category, as in there's a necessary process in order to become a mother that requires a certain kind of person, as in a fertile female, to give birth. No, this is a form of oppression by nature.
But if she does succeed in abolishing that connection, then what she also manages to do is abolish all of the social respect that's given to mothers for being mothers.
That's
true.
Like,
for example, their rights to look after their own children then disappear, because if it's not natural and essential, then you could just choose not to be a mother, and that's fine.
And in fact, I saw an article the other day on some website complaining that there was a pregnant woman and a man refused to give up his seat for her. And his argument was, well, you chose to be a mother. And everyone was like, oh my God, he's not giving up his seat for this pregnant woman. But from a feminist perspective, how could you demand that he does? You know, what's the difference between a man and a woman? Why should he?
Well, social constructionism is bad unless it means that men do things for women. So he should do the thing for the woman. I think that's the consistent feminist position on this.
Well, I think the consistent feminist position is that man did nothing wrong. And that man is totally within his rights to reject her aching back and feet and say, sorry, I don't have a social obligation.
In general, I would say we're in favour of chivalry on this.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not saying it's not. I'm not. That's not my position. I'm not the feminist here. But that is the feminist position. And it really does show that feminism is essentially about abolishing the sacred nature of being a woman.
Yes. It's abolishing all sacred natures because it comes out of this postmodernist theory. So,
but this is what Burke would describe as reducing a woman to being a mere human.
Yes. And the thing is, the arguments that they have for all of this is that, yes, we abolish the sacred nature, we abolish the heroism and all of the mythic narratives around it, but it's fine because we replace it with these benefits in material status. Now, first of all, the benefits in material status are dubious as to whether they even bring them about. But secondarily, for most people, the mythic narrative in the sense of heroism and righteousness is far more important to them than any material benefit that this theory might bring.
That is exactly right. And you can see this in women appealing to their own motherhood. And this was what this woman who wanted to sit down was essentially doing, saying, well, look, I'm a pregnant woman. You're a man, you have an obligation now.
Right.
And this man was repudiating it on feminist terms. It's like, okay, is that genuinely what women want? I would be surprised if it is. But it gets better, in fact. They say, her radical proposition is that we practice, quote, full surrogacy by abolishing the family. This means caring for each other not in discrete private units, also known as nuclear households, but rather within systems of care that provide us with the love and support that we can't always get from blood relations, something Lewis knows all too well.
So this is the systematization and bureaucratization of the family.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is literally the Brave New World outcome, where children are decanted out of bottles and then are just raised in daycares for their entire lives without having any attachment to each other or any kind of parental figures.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.